What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me are my two great co-hosts, Fede Perez and Ralph Hannah. And guys, it is officially 2025. It is our first episode of the year. Obviously, another big year for us as Paraguayan football fans for Guarani Vision. A lot going on from the domestic side, the international side, the national team side. I feel like it's going to be a really big year for Paraguay because I feel like everything's kind of coincided with things going on in a good way, of course, for the national team. Obviously, we're speaking in about 2 months before they kick off World Cup qualification again. So that could be a huge turning point for them getting ready for 2026 if they do make it to the World Cup. So a lot going on. Obviously, we got a lot of things to talk about with the Apertura starting, with a lot of tournaments happening for Paraguay national teams like the U20 tournament to see if they can make it to their first ever U20 World Cup in 12 years. It's been a long time for a Paraguay team that obviously is continuing to develop talent, and we see that with a lot of the players doing well abroad or getting moves that we'll obviously talk about in a second. But I think it's certainly something to really look forward to. And I want to go to Fede right now in a very hot Paraguay. It's always hot here in January. Everyone's on their vacation. The common people like you and I, or even Ralph as well. Everyone's kind of trying to relax before the busy season starts again, with the tournament starting in football and all that kind of stuff. But it's for the Paraguayan footballers, or for the footballers working there, I think it's kind of getting ready for their preseason. You got the U20 players already training for their tournament that we don't know where it's going to be played. It's for now it is Venezuela. That could change any second now, but it's go time for a lot of these players, and it's go time for us as we get ready for a big 2025 for Paraguayan football.
Hi, Roberto. Hi, Ralph. Hi to everyone listening to Guarani Vision. Great to be back. It's a great feeling, actually. Just you kind of miss these chats, you kind of miss these meetings with our boys, with our friends, and with everyone out there also listening and taking in what is Paraguayan football itself. It's great to do this again, another year. What is it, season 5 already in a row? We haven't stopped at all. We're not taking long breaks, even though it would be awesome to be just hanging out in a beach somewhere. But no, I got to take it here in Asunción. Football is almost back. But first of all, thank you there for being out there another year, because there's so much content out there. I mean, now that there wasn't football going on, I was looking at different podcasts, different things, and there's so much out there to really watch and listen to, but there's not much about Paraguayan football. Let's be honest about that. So if you want to know everything there is to know about Paraguayan football, if you want to follow it week by week, this is your spot to be. So obviously, help us out in some way if you can with any donation. We've been doing that since last year, so we really would appreciate it if you can help us in any way so we can keep this ball going. We wish you all obviously a very good year, especially for Paraguayan football, the Paraguayan sports itself. Hopefully it is that way. It's a big year. It could be the year. I was just listening to you, Roberto, for the national team. Oh my God, I was just thinking about that, and I just want March to come around. I just want those games to come back around. That feeling of the World Cup is so close. We have everything pretty much set up, the whole calendar, the international cups, the Apertura starting real soon. The Super Copa is actually the title that's going to kick it off very soon, the 22nd of January. Everything starts, so the season is almost here. And we're ready to kick it off, Roberto. We're ready to talk about everything that's happened so far in the market. Who's ready? Which team is getting ready to be champions this season? That's what we want to talk about, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go to Ralph here first and introduce him for the new year. Happy New Year, Ralph. Of course, it's obviously like Fede said, it's a big year, and everyone's really kind of focused, at least from a national team perspective, of March, June, and September, the months where Paraguay will play the remaining 6 games of qualification to see if they go to the World Cup. But yeah, I think as well, we're obviously keeping in tune of what's been going on from the Paraguayan scene. Of course, I feel like in this kind of perfect moment where everyone that is kind of been enjoying this ride for the national team that is doing well, we have to see what's been going on in the local league, which players could step it up. Because again, I think now for a lot of these guys, speaking strictly from a Paraguayan perspective, that they looked at the results of what they saw last year and they're thinking to themselves, okay, I need to do well in my club. I need to do well anywhere in the world to get considered a chance by Gustavo Alfaro. And that can mean, it doesn't matter how young you are or how old you are. I think that's a big deal. And you see that with some of the transfers that we're going to be talking about real quick when we talk into the Apertura. But I think they're kind of looking to that kind of perspective of what they want to do with their careers and think, hey, I have a chance to impress Gustavo Alfaro and I want to be on that national team. So yeah, it's a big year. Obviously, Paraguayan teams are playing in international competitions like Libertadores, Sudamericana. Of course, like I said, the U20 tournament, which could be a big deal for them if they do well. It's a lot going on in such a quiet time right now for Paraguayan football before everything goes crazy in about a couple weeks.
Yeah, that's right. Is the calm before the storm of everything coming up because the Supercopa, like Fede mentioned, the Apertura starts. You're gonna have the Sudamericana and Libertadores qualifiers that teams are involved in. And then of course the under 20 Sudamericano, which is I think very interesting, especially for people talking about players moving, because of course Diego Leon, for example, is in that team. He's leaving the camp tomorrow to go to Manchester to do his medical, and then he's heading back to join up again with the Albiroja. So he got that kind of okay to make that trip. But otherwise, everybody's getting really ready for that. And you can see in this under 20s team, which we'll talk about in more detail, but it's going to be really interesting that you have 6 Argentinian based players. You have quite a few players that have played Primera in Paraguay as well. And remember that Alfaro didn't really like the local league that much. So thinking about the senior team, is there anybody here that's still in the local league that might make the jump, that might impress him at that kind of level? And then we'll talk about it too, right? The transfers happening about there's some players that were in the national team that are coming back to the local league. So let's see what Alfaro decides in March, right? Does he want to keep those players that have decided to go back to the local league, or is he going to keep with his kind of, I suppose, commitment to the foreign-based players? And what about those players that don't have minutes, that aren't playing very much, that are in the kind of orbit of moving somewhere else or going to a new league? So there's really a lot happening. It's like kind of bubbling up, and then everything kicks off in a couple of weeks, I think, for us to start to see where we get to. And like you were saying, Roberto, I think everybody is concentrating on this year for the World Cup qualifiers. It's just such a big moment for Paraguay that they're so close that they have that chance to go to the US, to Mexico, Canada for that kind of first time in such a long time. So we're gonna see, and it's all like kicking off, and it's exciting now to start to see how these teams are going to shape up as we head into the start of the local league in Paraguay as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll go into that right now because obviously what we've seen in the last few weeks during our kind of hiatus of teams really trying to reinforce themselves. We're going to talk about obviously a team that obviously had done some business, the defending champions, and we're going to talk about Olimpia of Martin Palermo. He's obviously has been able to have a say in some transfers, and we already see some of them right now. I got them right in front of you, but just looking at some of the players that come in, the first big one that right off the bat, and it's good that he's the first one here because obviously my namesake, Roberto Rojas from River Plate, obviously had his time at Vasco da Gama, had his spells over there at Tigre as well. He has officially left Argentina. He's going back to Paraguay, playing for his first Paraguayan club since Guarani. You have also Tobias Morinigo leaving Chacarita Juniors, going there as well. Lisandro Lopez from Burgos, Diego Fernandez from Sportivo Luqueño. But the big one, Fede, the big one, Antonio Barreiro leaving Libertad. But the big one, among many others that are coming through, Darío Benedetto, El Pipa Benedetto, coming from Querétaro, obviously has his experience playing in Europe, playing in Argentina with Boca. Obviously, I'm sure Martin Palermo has had a huge say on that, but you have 2 Argentine forwards in there with Darío Benedetto and Lucas Prato, ironically, 2 players that have been kind of connected with Boca and River for the recent years. They are now on the Olimpia team, and Olimpia are really going for it because obviously they want to go and defend their title. They're also playing in the group stage of the Copa Libertadores, which obviously we have to wait and see what group they're in. But I think from the up, like from what we're seeing here, I think Martin Palermo is really going all in because I think he really feels that the Apertura and the domestic tournaments won't be enough for Paraguay. They really want to do something in this Copa Libertadores because they see the Brazilian teams going in and the Argentinian teams going in. I think they really want to do something in that Copa Libertadores, and I think with these signings that they've got, they're trying to really go in all in on that.
I don't know what you guys feel about this team, but I feel like Olympia is back. Hiring this way, hiring these kind of players, it feels like the old Olimpia, right? Where they were trying to build a good team for Libertadores. What was that, about 5 years ago? I mean, they went through a lot, right? The financial crisis, and they're still going through that. They still have a whole bunch of debts that they still got to pay, but they're able to open the window at least to hire at the beginning of the year, just like they did last year. And they hired a whole bunch of players. I mean, pretty much a whole new team if you want to build it up that way, because they got about 8, 9 new players. Obviously, they let go of a couple, but to be honest, I'm actually surprised by some of these names and some of the link ups that, the matches that could happen in there in the pitch. I'm already imagining who is Darío Benedetto going to play with. Is he going to start in this team? Is he going to play alongside Prato with the storyline they have behind, with that game in Madrid and what happened between them and River and Boca, and now they're teammates in Olimpia. There's that whole storyline there, and now obviously with Cerro Porteño's coach when the Super Clásico eventually comes also. But I mean, there are some players in this list that Olimpia is hiring because they were available. They didn't have a great year, and Darío Benedetto is one of them, I believe. After what happened with him in Boca, he went to try to find peace in Mexico. Maybe he found peace, but he did not find many goals. He didn't score that much last season. So I'm looking at Darío Benedetto right now, and I'm thinking, are you that same player that I watched before in Olympic Marseille back in the days in France? That was the best Darío Benedetto that I saw, and that was back in 2019, 2018. I didn't see that player with Boca. I didn't see that player in Mexico. I want to see that player. I think that's the player that Olimpia needs if they're going to do something in Libertadores. Hopefully they can get him back. He's 34, 35 now. So he can still have a couple of years, good years ahead of him, just like Antonio Barreiro, even though he had several injuries last year. I'm thinking the same thing about Robert Rojas, this guy that thought you thought that he was going to be fierce in defense when you saw him at the beginning of his career, but he wasn't able to manage to go from big teams to big teams. I mean, his career has kind of gone downhill. I would have expected him to be in Europe by this far, and no, he's coming back to Paraguay. So you're thinking, okay, these are a couple of players that would try to fight for a spot, try to get their best version. Yeah, they're good signings right now in the open market because of the name and everywhere they play, but are they really going to be up to the task? Are they really ready to come into this team that has just been champion and they're going to take over a starting role? That's the big question, I believe, right now. I mean, Palermo ended the year with a team that was pretty much coming out of memory, the starting 11 with players that were playing really well, like Ronnie Reyes, Eric Lopez. And so I don't know if you really want to touch that team that much, Roberto Ralph. I do think there's a couple of spots open in defense because of the players that left, but the rest of the team, I want to see just how much Palermo changes it up, not just from the names itself, but from the strategy, from how the team wants to play the Libertadores. Are they going to be a more offensive team, or are there still going to be this more defensive setup like we saw during the Clausura that actually was good for them because they ended up being champions?
Yeah, this is a big question. I think the Fede threw out there is about injuries for me. So they've signed many players that have had injury problems, and then they have players on the squad that have their own problems, like Derlis Gonzalez is coming back, trying to find his best form. So it's really, how do they manage all of that with the extra competition with the Copa Libertadores? But in a way, I think what Palermo is doing is really, he's like creating this environment for competition for places. So one player we didn't mention who was presented just last night was Ivan Leguizamón, a Paraguayan winger who joins from San Lorenzo. Very, very young, very interesting guy. And that's almost like direct competition for Rodney Redes, who was their best player last season. So it's almost as if Palermo saying, okay, you guys, we won the league, but now there's more competition to for places. There's some higher quality I'm bringing in, because for sure the quality level, the average quality is now higher with these players that we're talking about, regardless of their age and their and maybe their form. But like we say in the old English saying, class is permanent. So they're going to have a really good base and a lot of competitive kind of pre-season, I think, as these players try and find their way. I guess the big question for Palermo is he strong enough as a manager to not play people like Benedetto if he's not doing well, to not play For example, I don't know if somebody starts lacking like Robert Rojas, if it's not going to work out early on, does he drop him? So that's maybe where the question marks will come in, because we haven't really seen that from Palermo. He's kind of using what he had. He didn't have much to work with last year, and he did really well with it. Now it's how can he be strong enough, I suppose, to manage some of these big personalities that have come to the club. But definitely want to pick up on that point that this feels like Olimpia is at a very important moment now, because they've got the stadium, right? Or they're investing in the stadium. It's a huge investment. It's, let's be honest, it's a huge gamble because of the debts that they have as well. So this is their moment to kind of leap back to the Olimpia that, by the way, has reached a Copa Libertadores final in every decade. And we're halfway through the decade and they're not there yet. So they've got like 5 years to keep that record going. And this is really the moment where they make that leap. They're going to have the huge stadium ready in however many years, right? Or if things don't work out and they stop qualifying for tournaments and these players leave and they end up needing their wages paid, or you have to sack the manager and pay off the manager, suddenly all the debts build up and it could really come crumbling down. But I think at the moment is a really exciting time. I would be more as a fan, I'd be excited rather than worried, right? Those things come later. But this feels like Olympia is really trying to get back, not even to where they were in Trovato, even before that. I think this feels like the team that had Orteman, Marin, the 2013, got to the Libertadores final. It almost feels like they're building that kind of team again.
Well, that's the expectation. I think that it really is. And I think obviously from an international perspective, it's become more difficult for teams outside of Brazil and Argentina to really compete. So, obviously this, the difference in terms of like wages and, obviously getting the star players is completely different. That being said, it's obviously still doable for a team like Olimpia, who have that history, who obviously just won the Clausura. And I think for them, and of course having the big name like Martin Palermo as a manager, I think that kind of coincides with, trying to put this all together as a winning formula. And, we have to, I think for them, they expect obviously to win the Apertura. I think right now, I think they are the favorites. We'll talk about Cedro in a bit, but I think they are the favorites right now to win it. And so, but that shouldn't really take out the attention of what they're going to do in the Copa Libertadores. Obviously, we have to wait and see who their opponents are going to be and how they fare. Because sometimes we always kind of hype up these teams. Doesn't matter if it's Olimpia, Cerro, or whoever, and they usually fall down flat on their face because of maybe you have those issues of dealing with teams that can obviously beat you on depth, beat you on the way that they play. And I think for Olympia's case, like you said, Fede, as much as they have so many players, I think that's useful. I think having that depth is really going to be important, because I think those allow you to do well in obviously the Apertura or wherever. But I think when you play in the Copa Libertadores or any international competition, when you're competing with teams that are able to have all of those type of players, I think it's useful for that. So we'll have to wait and see what happens to Olimpia on that sense as we move forward to obviously what's going on with Cerro Porteño, their rivals, because they've also been doing some business and they also have been dealing with this drought. They haven't won a title since 2021, any title. The Clausura 2021 was won in dramatic fashion against Guarani. They've now since gone 3 years without winning. They need something, Ralph. They need something. And, they're getting their transfers in already from the get-go. They already, I think that the three big ones that kind of come in, or four at least we could say, because they're still trying to get someone in with Diego Martinez, their new manager, replacing Carlos Jara Salier. One of the big ones that we mentioned here is Abel Luciati from Lanús, 31-year-old center back, and then three players with either current or with past national team experience. We have Gaston Jimenez, who left Chicago Fire, the naturalized Paraguayan midfielder who was under Berizzo, had been playing that key role there back a couple years ago. But the two big ones, the two names that are right now current starters on the national team for Paraguay on the Alfaro, Gustavo Velasquez leaving News Old Boys, and Gatito Fernandez leaving Botafogo. And certainly I feel like even though they still have John on their team, I think this kind of shows that Gatito is the one moving forward, and that John, as much as he's kind of been kind of an enigma over there at Cerro Porteño for quite some time, his time is coming short. That his time is up, and it's now time for
His
him.
time is gone, Roberto, because they've let him go, Jean. So he's out of there. There's no
There you go.
questions about starting lineup. And the same with Javi Baez, right? They let go of Javi Baez. So that's where someone like Gustavo Velasquez can come in. The big question for Cerro, right? Well, actually, let me just talk first about Gaston Jimenez. I think Gaston Jimenez could be a very good signing. He's also coming in for another player they just let go, which is Carrascal. They ended his contract, so he's in that midfield. Jimenez could be really interesting if you can get the Jimenez that kind of played in Vélez, right? That was a really good player, a really exciting player. In MLS, I think he had a bit more of a withdrawn role because especially recently Chicago Fire were playing with the Swiss international whose name has just escaped me,
Shaqiri.
but Shaqiri, thank you. So he was playing a bit more withdrawn, but I think at Cerro maybe he might have a bit more. The team might be built more around him, and so that could become very exciting. Obviously, Diego Martinez was saying that this is a player he's followed for a long time. He's wanted him to join the club, which is important as well because this time last year you felt that it wasn't really the manager or the sporting directors making the signings. It was kind of Zapag when he brought back Zapag being the president, when he brought back Iturbe and Cecilio Dominguez. They were more romantic signings to bring players back, which almost happened. We saw with Oscar Romero that was linked to the club, but it sounds like he won't be going there because that doesn't really fit with the plan that they're building. In terms of the plan they're building, they're getting the players they want in. What Cerro really needs, though, is a striker, right? Because Diego Chirin has left, Fernando Fernandez has left, he's gone back to Guarani. So they're just, at the moment, left really with Francisco da Costa. They probably want to play someone else up there, and they definitely need, talking about competition for places. So that's the real question at the moment. Somebody's been talking about Adam Barreiro, who's not having a great time in River Plate. That would be a big signing. I think Sergio Araujo, they were talking about does he stay on, come back? I don't know. They're talking about
He's staying.
he's staying. Okay. So maybe there's something there. But you feel they're missing one more player. So that might be the big question for Cerro if they're going to mount this challenge for the league is are they going to have enough goals? It could be Cecilio Dominguez. Don't forget, before he got injured, or I think he got dengue, right? Before he got dengue, he was really leading the scoring. He'd actually done very well. But since that, and since the injuries, he's never seemed to get all the way back to full fitness and be that same kind of player. But the potential's certainly there. So again, it was talking a bit about Olimpia, right? Of these players that they're not at their peak. They've kind of come back, but they still have that quality. I think Cecilio Dominguez could count there. So that's going to be the interesting thing, really trying to find those goals that escape them, I think, in the clausura, and that's why they didn't get over the line ultimately in the league. So let's see where it goes. But I think it's really interesting, Gatito Fernandez and Gustavo Velasquez, who have kind of become these really important players on the Alfaro in the national team. And now they're back in the local league. So do they continue? Do they not? I guess we're going to find out in March. But that's really interesting for me that they also decided to come back knowing that Alfaro hadn't picked players from the local league. Maybe they spoke with him. Maybe they've already spoken and said, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. Is this going to put me out of consideration? Or maybe it's just the añoranza, as they say in Paraguay, that people just want to go back home sometimes and they get homesick. And this was an opportunity for two players towards the end of their careers.
I mean, Fede, before you go in, I mean, you're not going to drop Gatito. You're not going to drop Gustavo Velasquez on that team, even though they play in the local league. They've done so well for the national team that they feel like, yeah, you're going to still be there. So eventually, I think Alfaro really will have to kind of be like, okay, maybe it's time to look at what's been going on in the league, and try to force his hand a bit.
Yeah, the players were already called up when they weren't playing, so you would think that if they're now playing, even though it would be in the Paraguayan league, they would obviously still be called up, especially because of the role that they have in the team, and because they're experienced players, right? They're not just players that are starting out. I think that's also part of the signings that Cerro Porteño needed to make. I talked about this last year. Cerro needed not just to build a new locker room, but bring in new leaders, and these are the leaders that are gonna obviously drive the whole team around. Last year, the captain was just going from player to player, and it was Iturbe, it was Churin. You didn't know who was the real captain in that locker room. I'm thinking Gustavo Velasquez can be that captain. I'm thinking Gatito can be that captain, Gatito with the story that he has behind in Cerro Porteño. I don't know if they're going to be those guys that are going to take over in the pitch to try to shake the players up when things aren't going their way, because Cerro is going to be under that pressure. They're going to need those kind of players, I believe, in certain points of the season. But it is going to be a new goalkeeper, a new defense, a new midfield, probably a new attack also. So it's going to be a brand new team. Right now, I don't want to give a sentence about what's going to come of this team. I believe Cerro Porteño fans need to give this new coach a certain time, a couple of games to see what his new team is going to look like. He's still a very young coach, just 46 years old. He's coming from experiencing a big team like Boca Juniors. His career has just gone up and up, and this is his opportunity to try to come back into the scene, do something huge with a big team like Cerro Porteño in the international stage. They're going to have a couple of games in the local league before playing the international game in the second half of February. So this is going to get them going, right? And this gives them enough time also to probably bring in a couple of players still, because we just talked Olimpia throughout all their signings pretty much in just a couple of days. Cerro Porteño is still out in the market. They're still looking for a center forward. So we got to see who's going to play with Chico da Costa, and they need more options, I believe, in certain spots. As of right now, I don't think this squad is still fully ready for the competition they're going to have.
Yeah, I agree, Ralph, and I think that certainly puts Olympia in, like I said, in that position where they have the upper hand over their rivals. I think for Cedro's case, especially as a team that always demands a lot, like you said, you got to give this coach time. I don't think that always works there. I mean, you have those fans that want to win from the get-go and want to be perfect and want to do so well. So and of course the fact that they haven't won in quite some time, I think that just puts more pressure on whoever comes in, and the players that come in as well. So I don't know. I feel like Olympia have done enough, and maybe for Cedro's case, they kind of maybe missed the boat in saying, "Hey, we haven't done enough to really compete." Well, we'll have to wait and see. We still got time, but just from the get-go, I feel like maybe Cedro haven't done it. Maybe that's just me being a bit pessimistic, but it's just I don't know. That's just my thought. I don't know if you agree with me, Ralph, on that sense.
Well, I think they're still missing the striker, right? That is the key point, because like I was saying, Olympia, with the quality they brought in, they've definitely improved the squad on last year. Cerro have potentially improved the kind of psychological, the mental side of things with some of the leaders they brought in, but maybe on the pitch they're a bit more like for like almost. So the real key is if they can find that striker, or the other thing is, do they have younger players that can really push on? Of course, they've got three players in the under-20s at the moment with Diego Leon, Lucas Quintana, and Gabriel Aguayo, who have all played first team football. But then none of those are strikers. I mean, Aguayo is good at creating opportunities. He scores some goals, but again, none of those are strikers. Is there somebody sitting around in reserves that can come and surprise everybody, or even somebody sitting around in under 17s that in March will show up like Diego Leon did last year at left back? I mean, that might be what they end up needing if they're not able to find the right striker. But I think what we've seen, at least from the kind of renovation at Cerro, by getting the new sporting director and head coach in, by making these signings, which are still big signings, there is a bit more direction. I think they didn't have towards midpoint last year, when it felt like Jubero and Manolo were on their way out. They didn't know who was going to come in. And so that the Clausura was almost a lost season, well, they're like half seasons, the short seasons, because they didn't really know where they were going. It feels like now there's more of a plan. There's obviously a preseason with everybody together. So I think there's a bit more hope than, say, going into the Clausura, when it really was, hoping that Libertad slipped up, which they did, but then they weren't able to take advantage because Olympia were much better. I think now you do feel, by the way, as well, that this Apertura, as we're talking about Cerro and Olimpia, it will probably be between them, right? With Libertad not making so many signings, which is going to be exciting to see these two classic rivals going head to head like they have in previous years.
for me, guys, it's the big signing for Cerro Porteño is actually a player that we didn't get to see last year. It's Bruno Valdez. He was able to stay in this team. And, this is just a name that I didn't throw out there, but he's going to play alongside Gustavo Velasquez. I mean, those two guys are going to be really hard on defense to pass by. Maybe that's going to be the best thing out of this team. And I'm not with Raf on this Gaston Jimenez thing. I mean, I didn't see many Cerro Porteño fans going crazy when they signed him. Actually, some thought it was like kind of a meme or something like that when they saw it. They're like, is this a joke? Is this serious? This is the first signing, because I believe it was the first signing right away when the offseason started. I don't know if he's gonna have a starting role. I think he's gonna be important because the manager Diego Martinez asked for him. He wants him there. But if he's going to be the Gaston Jimenez that I saw on the national team, and if the people are going to be on top of him like they were when every time he put on the Roja, he's going to have a hard time in Cerro Porteño if he doesn't get on his toes quickly, if he doesn't have good games fast, because Cerro Porteño fans are not going to be patient with any player this season, and especially with the new ones. So Gaston Jimenez better have a really good preseason and better be ready for the physical football. I don't know if he's coming from that in the MLS, but here in Paraguay is going to be really hard for him, I believe, in that midfield, not just because of the competition they have going in that midfield with other players, but just because of the league itself, Roberto. Hasn't been an easy league for players that have come around.
Yeah, it has. And I mean, certainly I think his experience kind of helps him in that sense because, obviously he's had the competitiveness of playing in, obviously in Argentina and whatnot. So I think going into Paraguay shouldn't be an issue for him. But, I feel like his experience will probably be a big thing. There's always these sort of like remembrance of what he was on the national team. And I think I get that. But, things have changed. Players have developed differently. He's obviously much older than he is now. So maybe it suits him a bit better. I don't know. We have to wait and see. Same thing for Gustavo Velasquez, I got Tito Fernandez, and anyone else that comes in as well. Same for the Olimpia players. Have come in. How much of a how easy will it be for if it is easy for someone like Benedetto who left Mexico to come to Paraguay? How different is it from Argentina, from France, or wherever he's been playing? Robert Rojas as well. So I think we have to look at what we're working with, and yeah, just hope that these players can kind of coincide with each other because I think those clubs definitely need them at their best forms. And yeah, I think it's obviously going to be a very much a different environment for some of these players. They're trying to get back to what they were not used to back then. And yeah, see what happens from there. So really looking forward to it. I can't wait for the start of the Apertura. We'll obviously have our big preview on that coming soon. I would assume next week. And so yeah, just really looking forward to doing that as we switch gears now to the national team because obviously the big one that's beginning this month is the U20, the South American Youth Championship, currently happening in Venezuela. That might be changed in the next few days, but we'll have to wait and see. For now, it is still in Venezuela. But we look at some of the players that Aldo Ducher has been able to call up. A lot of players that we've been accustomed of seeing in the first division, from the get-go, Fede. Obviously, I think a lot of people are really going to be paying attention on Diego Leon, who obviously is about to make his move to Manchester United in a couple months. Obviously, he's the kind of the main, I would say, name in this case, but you still have a lot of great players in this one. You have Gabriel Aguayo at Cerro Porteño, who did so well. You have someone like Thiago Caballero, who's at a really good form at Nacional. A lot of experience here. I'm gonna run up the line of the team here for you real quick so you can have a good remembrance. But the goalkeepers are Facundo Isfran of Olimpia, Victor Rojas of Libertad, Leo Sosa from Rosario Central. So you got one player from abroad. The defenders, Lucas Quintana from Cerro Porteño, Gadiel Peaoli from Boca Juniors, Diego Ramos from Guarani, Axel Valbuena from Lanús, Diego León, as I mentioned, from Cerro Porteño, Tobias Morínigo from Olimpia, Matias Agüello from Olimpia, Maximiliano Duarte from Independiente of Argentina. In the midfield, we have Santiago Puzo of Talleres, Lucas Gomez from Guarani, Ángel Aguayo from Sudamérica, Lucas Iñuazu from Libertad, the son of Pablo Iñuazu, Luca Kemetz from Lanús, Octavio Alfonso from Guarani, and of course, looking into the forwards, Alexis Frietes of Libertad, Gabriel Aguayo of Cerro Porteño, Anderson Leguizamón from Guarani, Cesar Minio from Guarani, Thiago Caballero from Nacional, and Ezequiel Gonzalez from Hercules in Spain. So you got players even from Europe coming into this team as well. I think they were trying to get Hugo Cuenca, but unfortunately he will not be on this team, the Milan player, or the Milan Futuro player. But I really like this team. I really enjoyed this team, Fed. I think you have a lot of interesting players that could really make an impact on this side. And looking at the group that they're in, they're not in a. I mean, it's always going to be difficult when you play against any of the South American teams, but they avoid Brazil, they avoid Argentina, they avoid Colombia as well, Ecuador in the other group, and of course Bolivia. But their group is with the host Venezuela, Uruguay, Chile, and Peru, and you have three teams out of that five that go to the final stage. So I think for Paraguay's sake, I think they're in a really good spot to qualify for the final stage when you look at the team that they have.
Yeah, I'm looking at this list and I was just listening to you and a whole bunch of players from Guarani, right? I haven't seen this in a while, about five, I believe, from Guarani. A whole bunch of players from that club. That's good for them. Ezequiel Gonzalez. I don't know if you guys heard this guy's story. He was actually recommended by Nelson Aedo Valdez. That's why he's playing actually in Hercules, his former team. So there was something going on there. He was hitting up the national team saying, hey, you guys should look into this guy that's playing over there. I've actually tried to get him also to the Bundesliga. I believe he tried to take him to Germany, but no, they want him in there in Hercules. They're making a career out of him. I believe he started in Olimpia or Cerro Porteño. No, it was in Cerro Porteño. It was back at the days where Nelson Aedo was playing in Cerro Porteño. He saw him back then, and he's a huge center forward. Actually, I was looking into a couple of his games, and he looks really nice. Just because he's one of the ones that out of this list we haven't seen, just as those that you mentioned are also playing in Argentina. Those are players that we haven't seen here in the local league. So those are totally a mystery for us. I heard our coach Aldo Duscher say that he saw around 200 players he tried out during this period. So these are the best ones that he saw, and hopefully that team is built up already, right? With everything that went through Diego Leon's head during these last couple of weeks with the Manchester United signing. You have, I believe, another player like Matias Arguello. You mentioned him on the Olimpia list. They signed him before the Sudamericano. Those are usually signings, smart signings, right? Before a competition like this one, because, there's going to be a lot of scouts, a lot of eyes looking at all of these players. If you ask me, there are a couple of players that are already my kind of favorite players. I love Anderson Leguizamón, for instance. He's one of my favorite ones. I love what I saw Gabriel Aguayo last year from Cerro Porteño. I thought he had a fantastic year. He was able to gain so much experience in big games. Guiñazú is another player. You mentioned him. He's a player that, he's evolving. He's growing physically in that midfield, and there are a whole bunch of players that I really want to see, Roberto. I want to see how this team really handles it in there. We're seeing kind of an identity also lately with our national teams. They're all trying to play the same way with the same heart, Ralph. So hopefully they keep on that line, right? They keep on playing that same style, just like we saw last year in the Olympics, right? That was probably the last big competition we had with the national team. I kind of want to see that same playing style, even though it is another coach, even though it's other players totally for this under 20.
Yeah, that's right. I think here's the challenge, because traditionally with the U20s, you can bring up like a core of players that were in the U17s and they've been together. But what we've seen really here is kind of been all thrown together with a lot of these players based in Argentina because of what Duscher was doing. He was going out there and trying to widen the talent pool as much as he could. Which does sound like an Alfaro thing. We're just talking about not using much the local league. Now it's like, well, we're bringing in, I think it's 7 players from abroad if you have the 6 Argentinians and 1 from Spain. So he's really looking to go and widen the net to try and get the best talent, which is great. But then do you have time to build that team together? We'll start to find out on Monday or on Tuesday. I think they play Bolivia in a friendly. They have 2 friendlies against Bolivia as like a warm-up. So we might start to see that coming together and how this team will fit, how it will work. And I think what's really important at under 20s, and this can often make the difference, is do you have players with good minutes in first team football? Because at this level, of course, it's not like U17s when pretty much none of them have debuted, that you will have a mix. And here I think we have a good number of players that have a lot of experience. I mean, Cesar Minho at Guarani is very young, but he's played so many minutes already. So you have people, or even Alexis Freitas at Libertad, who made his debut during the Clausura, right? I think his senior debut, and he started to show, like Libertad players suddenly do. He's quite interesting, quite exciting on the ball. So I think we've got like a nice balance there of players with minutes. I'm really hopeful for Lucas Quintana. Go back a year to Lucas Quintana. He was in the Cerro starting team. He was looking really good, and he tore his ligaments in preseason in that Spain tournament, or I think it was the youth tournament before they went to Spain. So now he's back. Hopefully he's fit, and he could be a really good central defender when we're talking about traditional Paraguayan style and the style that Alfaro has been putting in. You want players like that they can be very physical and very good in defense. But I think it's interesting to see. And Roberto, you mentioned they should probably get through the first stage. I agree totally. They really should. But Paraguay's struggle has always been the final stage of the final group not running out of steam, especially when they play that very high pressing or very aggressive style, which we have seen, which we saw in the Olympics, for example. Are they able just to continue that on into the hexagonal final? So let's see if they can, because then it's definitely going to be a bigger challenge. You would assume Brazil, Argentina are going to be in there to play against. And I think Brazil specifically, right? They have like what's the word, like they have a debt with this tournament because they didn't qualify last time, which was very rare that you didn't see Brazil getting through. So I think there's definitely a lot of talk in Brazil at the moment of we have these teams doing really well in Copa Libertadores, but national team both at senior level and youth level is not what it used to be. So I think there'll be a lot of pressure there, and so you can expect a very difficult game, assuming Paraguay get through this first stage, which I really do think they will. I think there's a lot of quality in that squad.
Man, it would be sweet to knock them out again, wouldn't it be, Fede? To knock out Brazil or even in Argentina as well. But yeah, I feel like for Paraguay's sake, they can go through the first stage. But yeah, it's that final one. It's that one where you're gonna meet some big teams like, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, so on and so forth. I think that's the big challenge. And they could start off so well. I agree with Ralph. Like they do start off so well. I think even in the last one where they try to qualify for the last U20 World Cup. They did so well. I'm just looking at it right here. Yeah, they qualified out of a really tough group. It was with Argentina, Colombia, and Brazil, and they ended up going to finishing third. But then when they went to the final stage, they ended up finishing dead last. So it's not always that sort of, expectation of being like, yeah, we've done so well in the first stage. Now we have to, we're in it. We're gonna make the World Cup, but it's not always like that at times.
Yeah, for me, it's looking at this list and seeing how many out of all these players, how many are going to make it to Europe, how many players are going to make it to the national senior team. That's the real value, I believe, of these tournaments, because these guys are pro already. These guys are going to be professional footballers. Most of these are going to have really good careers. The thing is, are they going to have that opportunity to make that leap? Are they really going to be able to convert themselves into evolving into being that player that the national team needs? Because as of right now, the pool is getting smaller and smaller. It's harder and harder to get into that list of Alfaro because the team is doing well, everybody's playing well, so it's not easy. You really got to stand out. You got to do something different. You got to do something different. That's why I think a lot of players are moving anywhere they can, trying to get minutes somehow just to show themselves out there, put themselves on the radar. And I'm with you, Roberto. After coming off of 2024, where we beat Argentina, where we beat Brazil, I mean, people are going to look at us differently with the national jersey. And I believe that's a respect we earned, and we need to know how to keep, right? And hopefully we can do that, be a more aggressive team, be that team that, makes themselves respect out there. And this is that first big tournament in the year to do that against the big teams. So hopefully Paraguay can really put the stamp on this one.
100%, 100%. So we also look at some of the Paraguayan players that, have made some moves moving forward in this kind of, winter transfer slash summer transfer window. The big ones that we have to mention, of course, is Matias Rojas leaving Inter Miami, coming off of also Diego Gomez leaving. He's officially a Brighton and Hove Albion player. We're still waiting to see if he makes his debut under Hutzeller. Hopefully coincide with his buddy Julio Enciso. Obviously, we saw, like I said, Matias Rojas leave Inter Miami to go to River Plate. It's a big task for him going in there after not even a year at Inter Miami, and then obviously Tata Martino left. So there's no Paraguayans left at Inter Miami. We have also seen Isidro Pita move from Cuiabá side that just got relegated from the Brazilian league, going to Red Bull Bragantino. That's another one that, obviously, you look at some of these Paraguayan players that they need to get the playing time. They need to be into consideration for Alfaro. And yeah, there's a lot of players that, Ralph, will go to you on this one. There's a lot of players that are really trying to get their moves in, similar to what we've seen with Olimpia, with Cerro Porteño and whatnot, and other teams. They're trying to get their moves because they need to get in form and they need to pick up the pace if they do want to get considered for the national team. Because, you know, as much as we love talking about the club game and whatnot, and even the Paraguayans abroad, everyone's really focused on what, you know, they need to do to go into consideration for those games. The first one against Chile and Colombia in March. So yeah, I think a lot of these moves that have been going on are really for that, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Pizza wanted to stay in the top division in Brazil, so he made sure of that. Matias Rojas, obviously the Inter Miami deal was always a loan, so it was going to end, and he had the whole issue with Corinthians, so I don't think he wanted to stay in Brazil. And he goes to River Plate at a time where, of course, Adam Barreiro has struggled there. So you're looking at Matias Rojas thinking, can he pick up that form that he had both at Inter Miami and in Racing and take it to River. And then you got players like, I think a really interesting player, someone like Diego Gonzalez. We just talked about the under-20s, right? He had a great under-20s, which saw him move to Lazio in Serie A, but he never actually got into or broke into the first team. I think he was on the bench a couple of times, but I don't think he made a senior start in Serie A at least. And so he's gone back to Mexico and he's at Atlas. So he's going to try and get some minutes there, along with players in Querétaro that have just gone. For example, Josué Colman he's an interesting player. You know, he's kind of moved around after Guarani and Cerro. He was at Orlando. He was in Mazatlan, and now he's gone to Querétaro, like I mentioned. They're also kind of these interesting wingers. Could they get a moment? Could they get a shot? And then maybe we should mention the players that haven't moved, because sometimes that's important too. Angel Romero has extended his contract in Corinthians, and Gustavo Gomez has extended his contract with Palmeiras. He's got 2 more years there. So that's important as well to think of those two players. And another player there was rumors of maybe it wasn't working out for him, but recently he's got much better, and he hasn't been mentioned in the national team, is Alexis Duarte. Remember the Cerro Porteño defender? He went to Russia. He was struggling for a long time, I think, with adaptation, some injuries. But just towards before the winter break in Russia, he was getting a lot of time on the pitch and starting to putting some good performances. So again, this is another person that when March comes around, the season will be starting up there, I think, again. And that could be another player in consideration. So maybe we're talking about players that are moving, but also the players that are starting to get minutes that weren't before. That's also going to be really interesting for Alfaro to look at.
Yeah, Alfaro's gonna have to look into many, many games this year. I believe, he's gonna have to look into certain players that are trying to catch his attention. I do think with the move Matias Rojas actually ended up pulling out, he gets back in the radar, right? I mean, going to a team that's gonna be competing, trying to go far in the Libertadores. I mean, River is gonna have that pressure. So if he gets a starting job, if he starts doing good things for this team, it could be that kind of season for him. Also, he had an opportunity at a certain time in the midfield with the national team. Also, I was looking at the list. I was trying to remember, players that were playing those last games against Argentina, against Bolivia, and I'm still kind of expecting a move from Alex Arce after the season that he had. I'm actually surprised that he hasn't changed teams, that there hasn't been a big team that has come and just paid, because he's all about the scoring. He's all about the goals. And those are the guys that are really worth a lot of money. I'm actually surprised that no big teams have actually signed him. There was rumors about Palmeiras. At a certain times, it was also River, other big teams in South America, but nobody has taken him yet. There's rumors about Almiron moving from Newcastle. There's rumors about Enciso trying to find more minutes other places. There's rumors still about players that are important in the national team that could move, but the big signing has been Diego Gomez, no doubt about it, right? I mean, this guy has been so important with the national team last season, and we talked about him during these last couple of episodes in 2024, and we're still waiting for him to start playing for Brighton, and I think that's getting really close. He's had a couple of weeks already training. He's getting used to the weather. You're seeing him kind of struggling there with the cold in Brighton, but he's getting used to it, and I think the player that's the happiest to have somebody like him around is Julio Enciso. So you could see the spark on his eyes. You could see that he's happy training and having somebody there every day to talk with, and hopefully that can bring out the best version, obviously, also from Julio Enciso. So I think Diego Gomez is focused. I think he's ready for the attack, and I just want to see him out there doing his thing already.
Yeah, it's going to be big when he does hit the pitch, Ralph, for Brighton Hove Albion. Certainly They've had kind of a weird start. I wouldn't say start, but real run of form as of late. They haven't won in quite some time, actually. So maybe Diego could be the one that could spark up a team. I think they're going through a lot of injuries at the moment as well. So, they're still in that kind of race to qualify for Europe or a competition. Same thing with, the other Paraguayans with Nottingham Forest. They're doing very well. Even though Ramon Sosa has been playing too much, they've been doing so well. Same with Almiron. We'll have to see if he's still a Newcastle player by the end of this transfer window. Waiting for Enzo Gonzalez, see if he comes back to Wolves, who just, they sacked the manager that hired him. They got a new one. So yeah, really a lot of Paraguayans that are really going to take center stage over there in the Premier League come the end of this winter transfer window, basically, and coming into February and March.
And another Paraguayan, we didn't mention this in the Premier League, is Julio Soler, of course, at Bournemouth. As much as he wants to play for Argentina, he was born in
He's
Asuncion.
Argentina, Ralph. He's
Yeah, let
Argentina.
it
Let him
go.
go already.
Asuncion. His dad played in Sol de America in Primera in Paraguay. But yeah, talking about those players, I mean, I think it's really interesting that you have all the Paraguayans at teams that are doing very well, which is exciting. Well, maybe Enzo Gonzalez, we'll see how Wolves pick up. But I think it's really exciting for Ramon Sosa. You mentioned he's not getting many minutes, but you can tell they like him. When he comes on, he does well. The team's doing really well. So, of course, you're not going to really change that starting lineup. But thinking already ahead to next season when they're going to be in some kind of European competition, they're going to need those extra players, and I'm sure he'll get more minutes, and so that's very exciting. And then mentioning Diego Gomez, it's a real shame. I think maybe it's the snow. I don't know, but it's a real shame he's not considered for this weekend. They've already said he's not quite ready for the first team. But you would have thought like an FA Cup game, that would have been a perfect moment to put him in. I think I likened him on our last episode to Steven Gerrard, and so Gerrard in the FA Cup. There was so much history there. So was Gomez going to have that kind of moment to kick off? But we got to wait. We got to be patient and see what goes on. And let's hope as many of these players keep getting minutes and stay in those big leagues, especially thinking about Miguel Almiron, who has been linked to Charlotte in MLS, but I think from his side and from his camp, they don't want to come back to this side of the world. They want to stay over in Europe. If it's not Newcastle, maybe somewhere else, but they're very used to that lifestyle over there, and I think they want to keep that going. And he's at that kind of age where there's not really another big move left in him. So I think from now it's more kind of maintaining and staying where he is. And just talking about that quickly, you mentioned Nelson Aido. I think it's a very similar situation. Nelson Aido, he went back to Paraguay for the very end of his career just to play for Cerro because he hadn't done it. But now he lives in Germany and he's very happy. He's at Werder Bremen as a coach. But he always preferred being over in Europe since a very young age. And I think you can see the same thing with Almiron. That said, I suppose Aido did do a season in Seattle as well. So maybe Almiron ends up throwing out something for a year, but it really doesn't seem like that's what he wants to do at the moment. He wants to stay in Europe, if not Newcastle, somewhere else.
Certainly not Paraguay, not yet, Fede. But they always come back, don't they? They always come back. At least not yet, but they always
I
come back.
don't dislike the idea of him coming back to the MLS, especially if he's going to be the star of a team, just like he was at a certain moment in Atlanta. He's not that player in Newcastle. I mean, he's a role player there. They even made him play a defensive role at a certain point, but he can be a star in a team. And if he's going to get that role in an MLS team, even though it is MLS, I know the MLS has grown a lot, but hey, maybe that's a good place to go if you're not guaranteed a starting spot in another European place. If you have to go and fight, if you're going to be again subbing in, it's going to be kind of hard for him. Maybe a move to the MLS could be a smart move in this moment of his career.
Definitely. We'll have to wait and see what happens to a lot of these players, to what's going to be happening with the Paraguayan teams and everything else as we kick off 2025 on the right foot. We can't wait for next week as we go and talk about what's been going on with the Apertura and previewing that. And another great episode of Guarani Vision, as always, for myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Ralph Hannah. Thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.